Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being here to hear our presentation. I would like to thank all those who are watching us through the live streaming channel. And I would like to say thank you to all those who follow us from St. Martin with many hours of different time difference. I am responsible for environment, and I'm here with Laura. She's worked for the President's Cabinet. We are here also with Nicolas Masla, the Director of St. Martin Nature Reserve, Nature Park. And we are delighted today to show you our island within the context of the World Nature Congress. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we are going to show you our island. You will discover its biodiversity, well, at least an overview of our biodiversity. And we focused on emerging projects that will help us focus on environment and its preservation. St. Martin is an island located in the Lesser Antilles at the north of the Antilles. It is in between the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. It is divided into this French part and a Dutch part. At the south of the island, is the Dutch part. We have two administrations here for a total area of 93 square kilometers. In the presence of the two governments actually enhance development, although the two systems don't have the same European status. So the French part has about 53 square kilometers. There are 5 main ecosystems on the ground, among which reef, seabeds, mangroves, and dry forest. There are Ramsar sites, that biodiversity must be protected. And as you heard in the past few days, the French overseas have a particularly rich biodiversity, which contribute to 80% of French total biodiversity. And there is a high level of endemic species on the island with over 2,000 plant and animal species. Obviously, we haven't identified all the species present, but since in 2012, many new species were discovered. For example, there are 7 small islands around the main island. 5 of them are part of nature parks. The small islands have very isolated ecosystem with endemic species. There is, for example, a tree called Gaillac on one of the small islands. St. Martin is a sanctuary. It's a sanctuary of marine mammals of the Lesser Antilles, and that has been acknowledged by a SPO protocol. There are whales that come each winter in these islands and we produce there. This sanctuary is really big. It stretches over more than 140,000 square kilometers. It is one of the largest nature parks in the world. However, St. Martin's is threatened, or more specifically, biodiversity is threatened. And there has been a tax exemption measures applied to the island, which have had a negative effect on the island. St. Martin is densely populated. Its density is higher than in mainland France and comparable to those of Thailand. And so the economic strategy of the island is a reason of the state of affairs right now. There was colonialism, obviously, and later on in the 60s, tourism was favored because there was enough resources on the spot to and in 96 there was a law, a tax exemption law called the Ponce Act, which had two consequences: the rise in tourism accommodation and a population boom. The population tripled in 8 years. And the result is a socio-cultural fragmentation. So Saint Martin has been developed in a patchwork without a standard evolution. And there were many investors that came to the island, and a very diverse development, therefore. Consequently, biodiversity was subjected to a lot of pressure and degradation. Mountains has pushed man to settle down on the coast, and in the 60s there was this economic boom with tourism, and tourism accommodation has been concentrated on the coastline. Consequently, plants and vegetation are highly degraded there. There has been a high rise in the number of visitors each year with a mass tourism model that worked well in the US, and the US, as you know, is right next to St. Martin's. There are around 3 million people who each year come to St. Martin's. That's a lot for such a small territory. And there's a massive tourism as exerts pressure on biodiversity, can exert a direct or indirect pressure. Tourists reach wet areas that are not suited to tourism, and there are many boat trips in St. Martin, and this has an impact on the quality of air and water. Tourism also has an impact on coral reefs because of a lack of knowledge or because of local law violations. Once again, everything is concentrated along the coast, above all lighting facilities. That's why turtles move away from the coast while they are supposed to be there, lay eggs there. And everything I just mentioned has an impact on marine fauna. Despite this economic strategy, St. Martin is the third poorest collectivity of France. So the GDP per capita in St. Martin is half the one of mainland France. That's why we think that development of St. Martin has been planned on a shorter term, and there's been confusion between between development and growth. And economic policy had negative effect, and nothing has been done to rectify them. The island's economic growth is mainly based on tourism, because tourism represents 90% of our income. But development is a target and should be our target, because development is about improving the living condition of the population. So as you have already probably understood, we're facing a huge challenge, and we need to reach a development. That's our objective, and I will now address 3 topics. So first of all, we need a vision. It is essential. In the second place, which tools are we going to use? And thirdly, I will talk about governance actors. I'll start with the vision of our territory. As you know, in September 2017, a devastating cyclone has hit us and has destroyed 95% of the island's infrastructure. That is a lot. The recovery plan launched by the collectivity is being called Phoenix and is based on the concept of resilience. Resilience is the new slogan behind public policy, but it is quite broad. It can be understood as the capacity of any system to preserve its main infrastructure in case of disruption. And this term is relevant in the field of natural science, as it has been proven that if biodiversity and natural areas are preserved, then any territory is more likely to withstand and to rectify the effects of hazards, especially the effects of climate change. So we mentioned the economic strategy of the territory. We mentioned the living conditions necessary for the local population to flourish. Well, those are elements we can ensure if our territory is managed in a consistent manner and not controlled by separate individuals. Land planning has had an effect on local biodiversity. We haven't been able to compensate nor to calculate this impact on biodiversity. And Saint Martin has a really important tool called PELU. We had another tool, but we had a soil occupation plan that was implemented in '83 and reviewed in 2002. This land planning plan wasn't strict enough, wasn't strict enough, and it was more tailored to a project than to the rest. So part of the accommodation on the island has been built without any permit, and most of them have been built without any plan. We have tried to implement a PLU a few years ago that planned for further building works with cement, and that's how it was perceived by local population. The locals sensed that this plan wasn't suited to Saint Martin's. Urban planning has already had an impact on local biodiversity. We couldn't anticipate its effect, and now there is a new urban planning document that is more suited to the territory, more tailored to a local characteristic. It is we are drafting it. We started one and a year and a half ago. It is called the land planning plan for Saint Martin. It is quite specific, but it will contain the effects of our building works and activities on biodiversity. Other plans are being drafted, with the waste management plan, for example, or the sustainable agriculture plan, the local habitat plan, and there's also another plan for the prevention of natural risk that is supported by local collectivities. And these plans will be completed almost at the same time. After years implementing existing laws, we felt we needed a new land plan all over our territory after the cyclone Irma. It has generated the emergence of a new political will, and now we want to start from scratch and considering our new needs of biodiversity as well as the new challenges offered by climate change. There are different actors here. There is the Saint Martin collectivities with different tools, with a call for a project. There was one for sustainable tourism. The National Nature Reserve of Saint Martin was created in 1998 and covers a wide area on land as well as on the sea. And it works, this reserve works alongside the collectivity to ensure the protection of biodiversity. The state is also active here, and with a tool that was initiated in 1975 and implemented recently. Following the arrival of Cyclone Irma, the state has enhanced its presence on the island. So in the field of environment, there have been a new decentralized services, and there has been a contribution to the nature reserve. The director is here, and thank you for being here. He has been really active. He's been working and reaching out to courts, and he tries, is a good example of a balance between preservation and biodiversity, and he wants now to contain human activity, human effects on biodiversity. But this is only a first step. We need to continue our efforts, because Saint Martin, just like other islands, is finding it difficult to express its needs on the international scene and to make its voice heard. For example, we still don't have any national agency for biodiversity on the local level. There are studies and national assessments who don't take the island into account. So there's a Guadeloupe and Martinique that are quite close, and Saint Martin's a little bit further. And this is true for environment. We don't have any local indicators of sustainable development, but this goes also for all the other sectors. We lack statistics. See, that's why Saint Martin isn't visible enough to the state. And now let me tell you about our collaboration with the Dutch part. As you know, Saint Martin is divided in two. There's a French part and a Dutch part. It can be a challenge in the field of biodiversity. There are two different systems on the island. The French part is a peripheral collectivity, while the Dutch part is considered as a country, an overseas country and territory. So we'll try to reinforce our cooperation on an everyday basis, but it is quite difficult because we got very different systems. And lately, however, we have supported our colleagues in the Dutch part to enhance their law about plastics. As you know, the mainland France is subjected to a law for single-use plastics. But this law didn't apply to St. Martin's, and now there is no frontier between the French part and the Dutch part on St. Martin, which means that a single-use plastic can circulate, can travel back and forth between the French and the Dutch part of the island. That's why we have worked together, and we have the Dutch authorities have banned single-use plastics too, and the law was adopted at the parliament, and we're really proud.
So keeping in mind these three elements, several actions have been carried out on site to address those conservation challenges. We will present a few. The first one, the Caribbean Institute of Insular Biodiversity. This institute is carried by the Natural Reserve of Saint-Martin and recognized of general interest. It is unique in its style. Its first goal is to create knowledge on the natural local ecosystems to make sure that they are managed better. It is planned as well, the restoration of the humid area that is degraded and practically disappearing. So it will have a strong impact on this area. And an important point for us in the Caribbean is that this project was made to resist the extreme phenomenon that we can have, underwater hurricanes such as Irma, which was a Category 5. We prepared a short video, which I let you watch.
Le projet ICBI vise la création et le fonctionnement d'un pôle de recherche scientifique centré sur la biodiversité du territoire. Le projet ICBI vise la création et le fonctionnement d'un pôle de recherche scientifique centré sur la biodiversité du territoire et de l'espace caraïbe. Son but sera de générer des actions de gestion appliquées aux enjeux du territoire de Saint-Martin. Espaces invasifs, élevage d'herbivores marins dans le cadre de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique et la restauration des écosystèmes récifaux, l'aquaculture permettant in fine la création d'une production locale labellisée Territoire de Saint-Martin, et bien d'autres actions. Dimensionné pour accueillir 100 000 visiteurs par an, l'Institut veut développer l'écotourisme sur le territoire, mais aura également pour mission la diffusion des connaissances à tous les publics à travers une école de la biodiversité et un espace muséographie intérieur et extérieur. Cet espace sera totalement numérique pour permettre une immersion totale et le respect du bien-être animal. Les nouvelles filières de formation seront accessibles pour développer les emplois liés aux métiers de la mer, de la pêche, de la protection et de la valorisation des espaces naturels. Seront également initiés des programmes de recherche scientifique en lien avec la collectivité et les universités caribéennes, américaines ou européennes. L'ICBI se veut comme un réel outil au service de la biodiversité locale en optimisant les moyens pour assurer la qualité des missions de conservation du cadre de vie tout autant nécessaire au maintien de l'attractivité et de la compétitivité du territoire.
So following this creation, a few actions have been undertaken to continue to integrate nature in our development projects. Some actions on wetlands, for example, mangroves and marshes, by regulating the hurricanes and the water flooding, but also because these areas represent a shelter and reproduction areas. For example, we have 85 species who go on those wet areas. They are also facing conservation challenges due to the degradation of the soils or the loss of the mangrove. To face that, to mitigate that, several actions have been taken to mitigate the pressure. At the end of the 90s, these marshes were classified as wetlands. And then all the marshes were earmarked to the Conservatory of the coastline, of the Conservatoire du littoral, and they were recognized for the international importance. And in 2020, we started with the reserve and the collectivities that supported it, a campaign of replanting of trees, because these zones were strongly impacted by Irma, the hurricane. So this welcomes over 4,000 students per year to make them aware of the sensitivity of these areas. After these actions, the natural reserve and the local community and the backup of the Foundation of France will start on new projects, or also some pedestrian trails that will be open to the large public and to school children. I want to talk to you about an iconic project, which is the requalification of the front of the seafront, which was very important to revamp and revitalize the urban center that is dying after the hurricane. We made an assessment from the beginning that it's a space that is mostly made of concrete and taken over by cars, and it's also joined to a very dense city center, as you can see on these slides. The collectivity wished to modernize and reconstruct post-Irma to change the space so the inhabitants and nature would take over again. This addresses also a requirement of reintroduction of biodiversity in city center for its benefits on the resilience of the territory and to the way of life. We also would like to develop a soft mobility with bicycle trails and boardwalks. So we consulted a firm to have some studies made to integrate the population in the process. The participants, we've had a call for tender, and the candidates to the project went on the ground for several weeks. They discovered the territory under many angles for several days. They had a chance to meet all the users of the front line of the seafront, the restaurant owners, the fishers, the shopkeepers, but also the associations, such as the port establishment, the Chamber of Commerce of Saint Martin, the tourism office, and finally they met, of course, the services of the community. So these meetings were very fruitful in information, and the exchanges were dynamic and very well appreciated by the local actors. After this tender, we selected a project, which is the project of the Parc Swaliga. Did you show a before and after? Okay, the Swaliga Park. As you can see, it's a huge replanting of vegetal structures, the creation of a natural park, the fort being highlighted by a botanical trail, a theater in the trees, with the trees around it. So we consider that this project, with the creation, as you can see, of a green line separating the seafront to the rest of the city, and that really opens up the city to the seafront. You can see here the current situation, and the next slide is what is going to be with the project that we hope to see to an end. On the side, the community will also take back the management of the spaces of the Conservatoire du Littoral. We've already started with the management of the galleon, which is at the very tip. The galleon will be rehabilitated as a boardwalk and a cultural space for the school children and for all the visitors. A first convention has been signed. A second convention that was approved by the Territorial Council of the community will be signed very shortly. And finally, it's very important to talk about this place for the waste in our territory. So in Saint Martin, it's a new process that is going to be put in place, the PE, pollution-free integrated waste management, PI, carried by the company Verde. To give you an overview, our point is to reduce the environmental impact of waste and to valorize their energy potential. Historically, the dump is at the bottom of a little hill in a place that is a bit isolated and hard to get to, knowing that in the next few years it will reach its maximum capacity. So we need to think about the future of this landfill as of now. And something else, the landfill is bordered by the natural reserve of Marine and St. Martin, so we have to be extremely careful on how to manage the flows of the waste to the landfill so it doesn't have a negative impact around it. Typically, the PI project is a process in several stages. First, the waste gets on the spot to be treated immediately and turned into fuels, and the fact that they will be treated immediately will limit the risks of pollution and the proliferation of viruses and bacteria. It will help stabilize the site, which is a major objective for us, and then we will have this material will be burned, so this electricity will be used in the local grid for the project, and also, will be injected in the network of a project and re-injected in the local grid. So with this process, we'll reduce the use of fossil fuels, but more important, the conditions of combustion are very well under control to avoid any pollution risks. There'll be an eco-site that will be set up on the island. It will be the first one. And the ambitions are environmental, societal, and economical, adjusted to the territory, because we'll have different units of waste treatment. So this tool, which is very innovative, will reinforce the new policy of communication. We have launched our waste plan. We are working now on a territorial plan of waste prevention and treatment that we started on in 2021, and the community will be able to have prospects for the next 6 to 12 years on the evolution of the recycling, valorization of waste, and also an action plan in favor of the circular economy. I would like to conclude this presentation and let you wonder about a particular point for us, which is the arrival of sargasse, which we are submitted to in our coasts. I've heard all my peers from neighboring islands who kept raising the red flag on this phenomenon. So it is a pressing issue for all of us. So I don't know if you know what this sargasso is. Sargassum is. Those are algae, brown algae, and when they end on the coast, they rot and they produce a gas with hydrogen and sulfur, and it's a real plague. In St. Martin, the coasts that are impacted by the sargassum are inhabited. So we have inhabitants nearby who breathe this sulfur hydrogen that we don't know on the long term the impact on the health. But to explain to you, the electric device in 1 week are deteriorated, cannot be used, rusty, etc. So beyond the economic consequences on this touristic territory such as ours, the effects on the well-being and the health are significant. We are affected by this phenomenon, and the ecosystems take a risk as well when they arrive on the coasts, because we don't have the technology to pick up those algae, and that of course contributes to the deterioration of the beaches and the soils. We have noticed on a few occasions as well that it contributes to the alteration of the balance of natural ecosystems and asphyxiates certain habitats because of the absence of light and oxygen that capture the turtles and all kind of marine species. So facing the scope of this phenomenon and its consequences on the environment, the economy, and the health, we cannot act on the direct causes. So Saint Martinians have requested the help of the state in mainland France, and the states there to help us with the techniques and the financing. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we are going to start our presentation. And this presentation will be presented by 4 different speakers. We will talk about the protection of birds through national action plans in France. I am Mr. Langrand. I am responsible for the bureau in charge of hunting and protection of wildlife. And here is Olivier Patrimonio, my colleague. And together we will talk to you about National Action Plan. And we'll give you an example, the example of birds. And then there will be Patrick Goudarel, responsible for National Action Plan at the Regional Directorate for Environment, Development and Housing. And then our third colleague will talk about the Bonelli's eagle, so that will be an example. Finally, Axel is in charge of the Bouches-du-Rhône department of the Conservatoire, and he will talk to us about one bird called the little bustard. So now, what is a national action plan? Or rather, what it is not. It is not a regulatory document. It is a complementary tool to legislation about threatened species. So the law forbids anyone to harm these species. So we have decided to add the National Action Plan. So they will act as a supplement of the legislation on the protection of wild species. National Action Plan aims to protect and restore threatened species. They have a 5-year or a 10-year framework. They take stock of the species involved. They take their pressures and the threats under which the species are, and finally, the National Action Plan bring together different actions, several actions to protect these species. Among these actions, there are measures to, in order to understand species better. There are actions for preserving habitats, for reinforcing population with the reintroduction of species, and in certain cases we also try to facilitate the coexistence of species with human activities. There are also NPAs, a National Action Plan about raptors. The National Action Plan can take about, there are 55 NPA implemented, and they cover over 200 species. Some of them are specific to one species, while others bring together several species. There are 3 national action plans about amphibians, 11 for reptiles, 19 for birds, which shows that bird fauna is present. There are many also strategic action plans about mammals, insects, and flora. There are 55 plans, 17 are being renewed. So how do we choose these species that are subjected to NAPs? Well, we need to strike a balance among species. There are many actions for mammals, for insects, and now we are trying to target the most threatened endemic species, so that we can strike a balance in our policy. So we reinforce, we strengthen our bird policies as compared to other species, and we are still drafting new NAPs for new species. There are new plant species, 5 animal species, and a number in the overseas. So how do the national action plans work? They are validated by the Ministry of the Environment after the National Council of Protection of Nature gives its opinion. Each NAP has its own coordinating administration. Sometimes it is they're reporting to the central administration, sometimes to regional administrations. We work with coordinators, but there are also a structure that drives the national plan, that will actually draft the plan and then implement the plan. And this coordinator also works along with the steering committee, which involves involved stakeholders involved in NAP. Most NAP have a different version, are implemented on several regions, so they can be implemented with the same model on different regions, that is with a director, with a coordinator and a steering committee, and so on. There are funding allocated. There is a workforce dedicated to NAP. NAPs are funded, as well as a number of actions are funded, while the steering committee can also involve financial structures, and that is very often local authorities, water bodies, or water agencies, and other partners. Sometimes we also reach out to the European fund to supplement our funding. There are different tools available. And now I leave the floor to Olivier, my colleague, who will show us the results of some of the results achieved by the NAP. Good evening, everyone. I will take stock of what has been done with the NAPs dedicated to birds. There are mixed results, and according to the different birds group that were involved. So first of all, let's talk about birds of prey. So we focused on birds of prey that weren't numerous. So among them is the eagle of Bonelli, or the Bonelli's eagle. This NAP aimed to reduce direct mortality causes, death causes. They specifically targeted threatened species, and they gave the immediate results. There are positive results for all birds of prey that were targeted by the NAP. Preservation actions were taken for birds of prey, and there were also some forest species that were targeted by NAP. There's one bird in Corsica, it is the only endemic urban bird. Its nest is in urban areas. So there was some forest planning document, the document that helped manage forests, and this bird was inserted in this document. Although in the end, climate change will severely affect the habitat of this species. And now let's turn to wet environments. NEPs made it possible to improve our knowledge in order to protect habitats. There is a species that lives elsewhere, but it flies through France and flies through wetlands. So in that case, NEP implemented targeted preservation measures for these species. Now we also target species who live in farming environment. In that case, we build partnerships with farmers so we can draft and create a policy to protect these species. So there are different species involved. Some species show a positive trend, some others show a negative trend. And France bears a really high and important responsibility in that field, because some species are about to disappear. And the National Action Plan targeting these threatened species led to progress, as that is the case for the Amsterdam albatross. There are more couples of albatross now after the NEP. There were 125 of these birds. Their number fell to 50, and now this species is threatened mainly by alien invasive species. So that's it for me. I turn towards Patrick, who will talk about the Benelli's eagle. Thank you very much. I work at the Regional Directorate for Environment of the Occitania region, and now I will talk to you about the Benelli's eagle. This is a raptor. It is not really high, but it can be up to 1.75 meters wide. So he is not as wide as a royal eagle, but this animal is on the French red list. It's also at the red list at the regional level and abroad. And this species can have a long life expectancy, since some animals reach 30 years of age, but it is not always the case for most species. This is a bird of prey. It hunts other birds, namely partridges or other birds, little crows, and he does also hunt little mammals like rabbits. Rabbits was one of its prey, since rabbits are in decline too. Benelli eagles, once they reach the adult size, they settle down, and they don't move away, while other birds are erratic until they reach 3 or 4 years of age. If you want to know the habitat of the Benelli's eagle, just get out of this building and turn left, and you will see the hills surrounding Marseille. This bird of prey lives in rocks. 95% of nests are on cliffs. You could find them in the woodlands, but also on high voltage lines too. They typically live in the garrigues So they live in open areas, so it's easier for them to find their prey. Now, at the international level, Bonelli's eagle usually live in subtropical areas from Southeast Asia to the Mediterranean basin. It is estimated that there are about 10,000 couples in the world. Obviously, it is quite difficult to get precise countings and figures. In Europe, they are mainly on the northern shore of the Mediterranean. There are two main hotspots. You can find them in Spain, for example. There are 730 couples. There are 150 couples in Portugal. And as for France, there are about 40 couples of Bonelli's eagles in France. On the other hand of Europe, there are 100 couples in Greece. You can find 50 couples in Cyprus, and there are some Bonelli's eagles in Turkey. We don't have precise figures there, but there are around 50 couples. As for Italy, Bonelli's eagles are only present in Sicily. There are about less than 20 couples there. They used to be Bonelli's eagles in Sardinia. They left, but they're being reintroduced. And now, as for the Balkans, it is a really bad situation. There are only less than 20 couples in the Balkans. Let's now take a look at France. Bonelli's eagle live around the Mediterranean basins. There used to be 10 departments with the Bonelli's eagle, but now it is not the case anymore. They are mainly live on the Bouches-du-Rhône department, where there are 17 couples. This year, they also live in the Hérault department, in the Gard department, and in 700 departments. So why did we choose to turn towards this species, to study this species? Because there has been a strong decline. Before the 16, there were about 80 couples of Bonelli's eagle in France. And we have started to count them regularly from the 70s, and we show that then there were 70 couples. Unfortunately, this figure fell, and in 2003 there were only 20 couples left. Fortunately, since 2002-2003, this figure has risen and reached 41 couples this year. Since the 80s, a number of plans have been implemented, first by associations in the 80s, and then there was the ACE program, the Life's Ancestor. Now there have been a number of plans, and this is the third plan put in place. Bonelli's eagle faced a number of challenges. There are disruptions in their reproducing pattern in the places where they reproduce. They are located in regions that are really attractive, since they are in the southern region of France, in the southern part of France. Many activities are outdoors, and they can disrupt the reproduction pattern of the eagle. In the 80s, we wanted to ensure that the area where the eagle lives was quiet and calm, so that was our target in the 80s. And unfortunately, there have been attacks on the eagles. They were hunted, they were killed. It does happen again, since in 2019 we found 2 Bonelli's eagle with a lead inside of them. Nowadays, the main cause of mortality among the Benelli's eagle is electric shocks. They are electrified. They land on high voltage line, and that's how they die. And that's one of the consequences of the loss of habitat. Benelli's eagle need space to live, and unfortunately, this space is being now occupied by different facilities, such as renewable energy facilities. We have a marking program. We try to tag Benelli's eagles and to count the number of death cases. And usually they die because they land on high voltage lines. So that's the major cause, the main cause we have of death we have to fight. Some eagles are being hunted. Some of them have been poisoned, but this is really rare. Some eagles can also drown because during the summer it is really hot and birds need to drink. So sometimes they they fall into the water, or they remain blocked. We have managed to restore the population of Benelli's eagles because we fought against the main causes of mortality. The main first cause being electricity and high voltage lines. In the future, we will act on habitats because habitats have been populated with facilities, and now they are targeted by renewable energy companies. We have tried to restore pastoral pastoralism. Some species have been replaced. Now we work with electricity companies. Since the 70s, associations have tried to raise awareness with some electricity companies, namely NEEDE and RTE. We try to identify the sectors, the areas that are most at risk, the areas where there are many Benelli's eagles, and we try to take care to neutralize the high voltage lines. This is a long term. It takes a lot of time. It is a time-consuming action, but it works. Finally, I told you there were disruptions on reproduction sites, and we have managed to contain the risk quite well until now. However, it is still a barrier to our reconquest goal. Reproduction sites are sometimes occupied by humans for their activities, for outdoors activities such as climbing. So we need to solve this issue. So here's a picture of an eagle and a young eagle. They're different, but here they are.
Hello, Axel Wolf for the Conservatoire. I'm going to talk to you about the National Action Plan. I wanted to thank the moderator of the Action Plan, Cyril Porel, who helped me prepare this presentation. I'm going to talk quickly on the biology of the bustard, the little bustard. It's a species from farming land. It comes from the big steppes in Asia, and in Western Europe has adapted to farming. It builds its nest on the ground in the fields. On the right, on the left, you see a female and a male on the right, which is less discreet and tries to attract the females. So a small point on the ecology, the female deals by herself with the nest and the eggs, and the male, in the meantime, tries to capture other females. So they live in farming areas without trees, and they also live in grass cover when the grass hasn't been cut yet, and they eat a lot of insects. It's a species that is in decline in Europe throughout the 20th century. You can imagine that they used to be sold on Paris's markets, food markets. For now, they tend to stay in Spain, and they have declined a lot, 50% in the last 10 years. In France, we have two distinct populations. One is a migratory species, and they actually spend their winter in Spain, and a small population where there's 325 males left, and the rest is a Mediterranean population, is a sedentary population, and is at about 2,000 males. You can see a different dynamic if you look at the map on the right in black. These are the departments where the species has disappeared since 2000. And in green, the departments where the species has reappeared. You can see that it's doing well in the south and southeast. Why? Because in the center-west, the species nests in big farming lands with a lot of agriculture and intense agriculture. So it's not favorable to their nest. And the worst problem is when they find grass covers that they feel favorable or not, because when the female is going to build the nest, very often in the middle of May, when they're in the middle of the reproduction, the tractor arrives and cuts the lawn and cuts the planting and kills the female birds at the same time. The other problem is there are practically no more insects in those farmlands. So when actually the baby birds are born, they die very quickly because they don't have any food. In the Mediterranean, it's different. There's some agricultural land that are still extensive. In the vineyards as well, they can make their nest, and also in aviation lands. In the Provence Côte d'Azur, 20% of the birds make their nest in aviation land, fields. So I give you a couple of examples of the actions that we've done. We need to preserve the habitats for the little buzzard. What does that mean? Fighting as much as we can against planning and building and construction to reduce the impacts. The other phase of this action is to try to extend the protected areas, and particularly the network Natura 2000 and the natural reserves, in particular the natural reserve of the Koussoukro, which shelters quite a large population of little buzzards. Other actions make the farming practices more favorable. You understand that it's a major problem in the plains of the center-west for this bird. So the best way to do it is to make some contracts with the farmers so they can adopt practices that are more favorable to the little buzzard. We have about 1,000 contracts with farmers for a total of 10,000 hectares. It works very well. However, we don't manage to reach enough space, and we estimate that 5% of those protected areas should benefit from special measures, and it's very hard to get there. The other goal, particularly in the Mediterranean region, is to support the farming practices that are already favorable. We have the cutting and the mowing practices that are already in favor and trying to protect the bird. So we tried even to do a few measures to encourage that. A last type of action there are not many favorable habitats anymore. Some farming land in the center west, where the buzzard can reproduce easily. So on those alfalfa crops land, there's a problem, there's a risk with the cutting and mowing of the grass. So there's a whole research that is being done with a drone to see where the female builds the nest, and the idea is to try to detect the female birds in those farming lands before they are killed, so they can then protect them and save an area for them so they can be saved. So this measure has helped save a number of nests. I think I am done on my side. I don't know if we have a lot of time left for questions. I think we have 20 seconds left. Sorry. Thank you for your attention. Well, in this case, there's a question, one question here. Yes, it's regarding the little bustard, the agreements that are made with the aviation fields. Are there any conventions? Because I stepped out for a few minutes. Do you have conventions? No, I didn't dwell into the aerodromes because it's quite complicated as an issue. We usually don't have any conflict on the aviation lands. We had one with the Marignan airport that is being solved. On the other airfields, there's a regulatory side to it, because the managers of airfields who are fighting against the hazard against animals, they need to ask for special authorizations. So if they feel like they are destroying an endangered species, so it happens that we have to go to have a council for some airfields. We have a convention with the region Provence-Côte d'Azur, and they manage 2 airfields. That is one in Vignon and one in Avignon. So we had some ecological plans put in place to try to combine the exploitation of the airfield and the safety of the airplanes, which is of course key, and the management to take into account the protection of different bird species, including the little bustard. Can you clarify on Vinon what has been made? What kind of actions? First of all, there's the work to diagnose, to make a diagnostic of what is the situation of the little bustard population, what areas it goes to, and what are the practices of the manager of the site. Which is a bit special about Vinon is there are also some farmers. So among the measures that we've proposed is the modification of the dates and schedule of the mowing dates that are close to the airfields. So there are some obligations to respect a special agenda to cut the grass that are near the airfield and the strips, the landing strips. And there's also a project of a convention with a farmer to maintain the ground without having to cut it in some places. That's just to give you an overall idea. What should be really noted for the Marignan airport is that we have some authorization for the manager to make sure that the number of birds killed is less and less. And actually, since 2016, no bird has been killed. So that has been because of the derogations that were granted to that airport. The big buzzard has disappeared in France at the beginning of the 20th century. You can see one once in a while, but it's very rare. Hello, I have a question on the Bonelli eagle. Do you have an idea why it's not present in Corsica nor in Sardinia? That's a difficult question. Sardinia, it used to be there. We're sure that it used to live there with a real population. And it's being reintroduced in Sardinia as we speak for at least 2 or 3 years. It's fairly recent, after it was reintroduced in the Balear Islands, where it disappeared from in the 70s, which worked fine. So there's an international program in which France participates, has reintroduced for the bird in Sardinia. For Corsica, we've never had the clear evidence that the Bonelli eagle reproduced in itself in Corsica. There are some birds of Sardinia that moved to Corsica, but will they settle there? We don't know, because there's a very big population of the royal eagle, and they too compete. The Bonelli eagle is a typical Mediterranean species, but the royal eagle can live anywhere by the Mediterranean, or it can live in the Sahara, or even in the mountains. So it's a stronger species, so I'm not sure he's going to manage to settle down in Corsica. We need to conclude. We can extend the conversation with those who have questions later on. Thank you for your attention.